People with very religious parents, what were their strange rules or restrictions they put on you? Don't miss out on the fun. Hit subscribe button and join our community for more stories like this one. For me, we weren't allowed to play or watch Pokemon. No Ren and Stimpy, no Dinosaurs, the 90s TV sitcom, no Harry Potter. It was all because they considered them too crass, or because it's demonic. Now that I'm grown up and see them watching the whole Game of Thrones series and Pedro Almodovar films with explicit sex scenes, that I see the hypocrisy. They made me keep a large crucifix on my bedroom wall with Jesus looking down upon my mattress. Apparently, they thought it would prevent me from sinning. Friend in high school had conservative religious parents. They made him write down all of the lyrics to the music he listened to, I think so they could read it over and decide if it was okay. He left home at 18 and has little to no contact with his parents as an adult. My parents were like this with music and fucking reading. Like I had so many books I was into taken away because it distracted from God, so they said. My therapist pointed out that it was likely because it was difficult for them to gauge what outside ideas and beliefs I was discovering because they couldn't just read every book that I did. So instead they tried to keep me from doing it. Let's see. No radio, no movies over PG, no Halloween. It wasn't the overt rules that were the hardest, it was the covert ones. We couldn't make mistakes, question anything, hesitate to obey, or have an opinion. It was the overall knowledge of that nothing was ever okay. We could never live up to those standards. It was suffocating. The end result was a very strained relationship with my parents and me being obsessed with Halloween. Of all the things, I mourn the normalcy of trick-or-treating being taken from me the most. It's weird, but it's true. I taught community college for years. Another instructor, not me, was actually called by a religious father of one of his female college students. The father asked the instructor to make sure that his daughter didn't talk to any boys while the class was on break. The instructor gently explained that as the daughter was 18 years old, she was of legal age and was entitled to do whatever she wanted. Plus, chaperone was not part of the instructor's job description. The father approached our dean, who backed the professor up and explained that instructors of adult students weren't allowed to discuss the academic progress of an adult student with his or her parents. But the parent was free to take the class himself so he could keep an eye on his daughter. He didn't. And then the parents wonder why their child is 38 and still living in the basement. Same. Parents made my life hell after they found out I had safe legal sex with my long-term partner. I wasn't allowed to be under blankets, not allowed to sit next to him, never allowed to play fight, and so much more. For years as a kid I happily played with my cousins at the pool or beach. Then suddenly one year, I was probably 11-13, don't really remember, my mom pulled me back and told me I couldn't play with my female cousins anymore when they were in bathing suits. I asked why not. My mom gave some vague answer about how they were now developing into young women and it was no longer appropriate. I looked over at them playing on the beach and didn't see young women. I saw my friends having fun without me. No dating, even through age 20. They wanted to do the arranged marriage thing without calling it that. Caused a surprising amount of damage to current relationships that I'm still sorting out. Oh yeah, my parents banned pretty much any show where children acted as proper characters and not just extensions of their parents. Apparently showing any kind of initiative or dissent to your parents is disrespectful. A 60-plus-year-old man, Eka the bishop, asked me if I masturbated when I was 12. I had legitimately never heard that word before, and I made him explain it in the Temple Recommend interview. He said, quite embarrassed, self-sexual simulation. I said, no. The only people who have any right asking kids if they are touching themselves are medical professionals, and that's it. The only acceptable follow-ups are keep it to yourself, and hygiene recommendations. I was not allowed to eat chocolate because it had caffeine in it and the religion's extreme ban all forms of caffeine. My mother is an extreme Mormon, so I had some crazy rules and some major issues being a girl in that church. Not my parents but a friends made us say a Bible verse before getting breakfast or we didn't eat. 2 of us weren't religious, so we had no idea. Our parents never let us go back after that. No allowance unless I attended church. If they wanted me to associate church with money, I guess they succeeded. Well, theirs was the stuff you expect. Like Pokemon was banned, Harry Potter was banned. That sort of thing. They took it a little farther, So like Avatar was banned because Eastern mysticism, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. We weren't supposed to interact with people they hadn't explicitly approved, although that was only half over religion. Mom was afraid we'd be exposed to religious ideas she didn't like, and she also thought there were literal demons wandering around. Dad was more afraid we'd talk to people he disagreed with politically. In any case, the requirements for approval were very strict, and subject to revocation at any time, and we were homeschooled. In other words, we didn't get it much, and even when we did, it's hard to build relationships when you rarely see the same people twice. When I was really little, Mom wanted us all to say the rosary together. Before bedtime, she'd have us all kneel up against her bed, but our torsos had to be perfectly vertical. Dad beat us if we dozed off or even leaned on the bed, which makes me wonder why we did it there in the first place. In theory, we weren't allowed to have money, because then we could go buy things without having to get our parents' approval. Not that they ever bought us things when we asked anyway, or that we were allowed many opportunities to spend money, but the way they described it, cheapness was secondary to control. In practice though, if we were careful, we could hide some of the money that the other family members gave us on holidays. We'd have to make sure some of it went to our parents or they'd get suspicious, but when we were old enough that they had given up on homeschooling, we were able to stop by a store on the way home from school, so long as we didn't stay long enough to tip them off. Speaking of post-homeschooling, the other thing we could maybe, sometimes, do after school was to get together with friends. But of course, there were constraints on that too. The main thing was that we were supposed to check in with our parents before we went to do anything. Unfortunately, I wasn't given a phone, and for the aforementioned reasons, I couldn't buy one myself. This was post-pay phone. I couldn't borrow a friend's phone because my parents didn't answer strange numbers, and my friends weren't willing to wait a half hour for me to walk home and back. Basically, the only way I could pull it off was to plan in advance, which most friends weren't willing to do. Even then, my parents of course could just deny permission at any time, so I'd have to bail because of their whims, and nobody wanted to make plans with me because that made me a flake. I complained to them about it, but they beat me for disrespecting them, and told me if it was too much of a hardship, I must not really want to get together with people. I wasn't allowed to use tampons because they would make me loose for my future husband. Seriously. I was never allowed to watch SpongeBob for some odd reason. I remember one time I went over to my friend's house after begging my mom for weeks, and as soon as I got in his house I sat down on the couch and immediately turned on SpongeBob. I remember him asking me, "Why do you like this show so much?" My response was, "My parents think he's a devil creature from hell and they never let me watch it at home first time and last time I ever went to his house again." To give some context, I'm 45, female, and grew up in the 80s and early 90s. We couldn't watch movies in the theater. I saw my first movie at a theater when I was 17 after I moved out. No music with drums because drums could summon evil spirits. Couldn't pierce my ears. Couldn't wear pants with zippers. No TV until I was 10. After that, when we rented movies, we couldn't rent anything made after 1950. My dad said it was all trash after that. No friends of a different faith. The word "but" was a cuss word. Couldn't say a ton of very normal words. I had to memorize one Bible verse for every 7.5 minutes of television. One 30-minute show required memorizing 4 verses. Ironically enough, one of the few shows my parents deemed appropriate was The Cosby Show. Also, my 3 siblings and I all have the initials J.C. because my dad wanted to ensure that if Christianity was ever outlawed, we would always remember Jesus Christ because of our initials. I was not allowed to look men in the eyes in public. I was taught to keep my head down because as a girl/woman we are sinful Eve and tempt men to sin. Every December they hid a piece of the nativity scene decoration in every room of the house, like they hid them good. And if you didn't find all of the pieces in 3 days you were grounded until June for not believing in Jesus enough. I wasn't allowed to listen to Katy Perry inside the house because it would be opening the door to Satan. Why Katy Perry specifically? I think something about wearing a witch dress to an event. I'm a middle child, older sister, younger brother. My parents made me and my sister treat my brother like a king and had us do all the chores since my brother is the only boy and my father is the head of his side of the family. My parents said that it was our duty to take care of him since when we were older he would decide whether or not our boyfriends would be suitable husbands. Thing is, I have a girlfriend. My religion is generally a very open on what's wrong and there's nothing too bad in it, but my parents like twisting things to limit me and my sister from doing daily things. Subscribe and hit the bell button for the best Reddit stories available.